I am the clear light of the ultimateness. I am the voidness of the void, infinite, eternal, uncreated. I am the bornless one. There is no other. Not the void of darkness, not the void of nothingness, not the void of non-existence. I am the endless endlessness of the Absolute. Nothing is happening. Nothing ever has happened or ever will happen. All phenomena is illusion. What is not illusion? No one thing more than another. Appearing in the dream, emotion, thought, sensation, acting and reacting, with or without my presence, the play goes on. Impartial to it all, neither attracted nor repelled, alert and watchful, consciousness will carry me through. In reality, there is nothing to be born, to die, to exist, or to change. This is my true nature. Welcome to the Architects of Conscious Transformation. We visited Tibet, and in so doing, we saw a few examples of the architecture there, but really, the conscious architecture of Tibet relates to a way of being, to a way of living consciously, and the tradition that is Tibet, mostly Tibetan Buddhism as we understand it now, originates from the great Buddha being Padmasambhava, whom we see displayed before us here. Padmasambhava came from India to Tibet in the 8th century. Along the way, before he got to Tibet, he stayed in Sherpa land on the other side of the Himalayas by Mount Everest, and he passed on the great tantric Vajrayana teachings to those people before he went and disseminated those profound consciousness injunctions and teachings to the people of Tibet and Bhutan. And here we see him kind of floating in the clouds. Padmasambhava is considered by some to be another Buddha, the second Buddha after Sakyamuni. And the profundity and the depth of these teachings really hasn't been appreciated very much outside of Tibet, but in that country, while it lasted, that they created a way of living and a way of being, regardless of whether it was a feudalistic political society. The type of trust and the type of how can it be put? The type of innocence toward one's real goal in life are unique almost in the world. Of course, for the last 50 plus years or more now, it has been occupied and is now annexed into Greater China, but the heart of Tibet is its real essential teachings that are now being offered to the world, thanks to the various lamas and teachers that have gone all over the world and spread the Dharma. This is the Dharma chakra symbol of the wheel of Dharma, and really the significance of Tibet isn't so much in its architecture, but in the way that it can help all of us to realize the true purpose of our existence in this or any other universe. And so when we got there, we saw some buildings. This is, of course, the famous Potala Palace in Lhasa, and the Jokhang College and the Jokhang Temple is in this area too. Another view of the beautiful mountains and the beautiful location of this world wonder, truly one of the last remaining official residences of the Dalai Lama. And all the temples, of course, have, by any standards, been destroyed during the Cultural Revolution. 99% of them were. But regardless of that, the real treasure of Tibet is the teachings that are still present and active amongst humanity. And this is in the Jokhang Temple, and there is Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava. And this is not so much an idol, but a reminder about what our real purpose for being here is, the intrinsic awareness of what we truly are, the naked awareness that every one of us is at ground, at root, is the reason for any of these conscious teachings. And so, in a sense, Tibet in the modern age exemplifies that attempt to help humanity evolve consciously through various practices, whatever means could be found to help sentient beings, all beings, realize absolute enlightenment, full enlightenment. The coloration and the actual designs of these temples is obviously meant for meditative purposes, for practices that are mind practices, a lot of them. They are inwardly directed to realize the focus of one's true attention, the focus of one's being. And of all the great teachings that have come to us through the Tibetans, the unexcelled liberation, the inconceivable enlightenment of Padmasambhava is one of the most profound that's ever existed on the planet. And truly, the teachings and philosophy and the practices are alive even now. Even now they are alive. So when we look into these beautiful works of art, we see a living tradition. This is not something that's in the past. It's still living and with us at this very moment. And for those that have the necessity to find someone who knows about these teachings, someone who can dispense them, then they're out there. And they're within you. Find the real source within yourself, and you'll find the teaching as well. Padmasambhava really wished to transmit the nature of reality. And the nature of reality is not somewhere outside. It's not somewhere separated from other things. It is, in fact, what we are in every moment. In every moment, regardless of how conscious or unconscious we seem to be, that naked awareness is always present and is what is, if you will. And everything in the culture, in the sacred art and architecture of Tibet, has that one aim of bringing all beings everywhere to full awakening, to full enlightenment, to full completion, the realization of the perfectionless perfection. The various teachings and philosophies of the East have given us different viewpoints on what reality might be, but this particular mandala relates to what's called the Bardo Thirdal, the otherwise named Tibetan Book of the Dead. And in this particular mandala, the mandala of Samantabhadra, which is not the final bodhisattva in the 1,000 Buddha cycle of this particular age that's going to bring all beings to enlightenment in this universe. It is Samantabhadra, the primordial Buddha, embracing Samantabhadri. Male, the masculine, feminine aspects are always in undividable union, the co-emergent unity, beyond unity actually, of nothing and bliss, wisdom and compassion, whatever, however you may wish to describe it, it is in fact the perfect, complete balance of everything as it is. And so this is represented in the central figures by Samantabhadra and Samantabhadri, and around them are the seed syllables of all possible liberations in all possible universes. This is, in fact, the great teaching delivered in one momentous, beautiful work of art. A work of teaching, a work of art, all in one package, if you will. And these are actually put on the bodies of the deceased to be worn at the moment of the body's cessation, at the moment of death. And all the instructions are, like in the Egyptian versions of the books of the dead, there for the voyager, for the being who is now in transit, who is going into the between life states, between one birth and another. And these teachings are intended to confer instantaneous enlightenment, instantaneous awakening, instantaneous liberation, freedom from all cycles of birth and death. And so a truly profound practice. The teachings themselves are limitless in their application. And so with Samantabhadra as the starting point, we're going to get into the Tibetan Book of the Dead for a moment. And at the center of that mandala, once again, is this rendering of the absolute masculine feminine principle. Actually, it's the undivided unity of being. And Samantabhadra, Samantabhadri, in union, represent the actual nature of reality. It is undividable, beyond duality of any sort, and therefore in perfect bliss and harmony, always, regardless of the apparency of things, regardless of how things may appear, no matter how terrifying, no matter how much suffering there appears to be, no matter how much happiness and joy there seems to be. The positive, negative cannot throw this unshakable, unbreakable balance off center, ever. And this represents far more than that. It represents primordial consciousness and the primordial state of the universe as expressed both in the figure in the center and then the rainbow pattern around it. That is the basis of how every universe is put together through this rainbow pattern, this rainbow of different components of consciousness. And when you vary the ratios, when you vary the order of these particular components of consciousness, you have another universe, another form of being, time, space, whatever you want to call it. They are, in fact, infinite in variety, and yet at the center of this, the all-awakened, all-compassionate, all-loving, all-void truth of reality that is, in fact, the core of our own being, every one of us. And so this starts off our little journey into the Bardo Thirdal. Now, we can see these are just the primordial seed syllables of what becomes personified as the skandhas, the primordial Buddhas that are beyond necessarily human manifestation. They are principles that generate reality, that generate existence. And in this case, each of them has a color. In fact, if we don't even have a Buddha form, we can call them anything we want. We can call them archangels, we can call them nothing if you want. You can call them bright lights, the harsh radiations of reality, the components of consciousness that create our momentary worldview. However one wishes to place it or name it, it doesn't really matter. These teachings are not intended to create so much a loyalty toward one religious doctrine or another, not to create any kind of dogma or anything to cling to. These forms, these representations are really there to free us of any personal identification with what we might be, so that we can let go and just be what we truly are. In any case, these forms then become personalized, or you might say humanized, in the iconography and in the traditions of Buddhism, in Tibetan Buddhism, and they become the masculine and feminine aspects of the Buddha energy, wisdom and compassion, the energetic, active, you might say passive, nurturing forms, all before us. On the right, we see the different masculine aspects of the Buddha forms. On the other side, on the left, we see the feminine aspects of the Buddha forms. These, in fact, are all there within us. Each of these forms of conscious energy and transformation are there to allow every being the possibility of fully realizing perfection through whatever form they happen to be traveling in. So these Buddha forms are not necessarily human. They can be anything at all, but they serve the same function. They are a function of infinite, unconditional awakening and enlightenment, and really the purpose of existence in the first place or the last place. It goes beyond first and last. It's an ongoing, infinite, endless process, and yet it is always realized. It is always in the present moment. So if we look more closely at these Buddha forms, we'll see that, for example, up on the top left corner there is Padmasambhava and Mamaki in union, the male-female of the component of feeling and sensation. Color is yellow. Amitabha, Pandaravasini on the right, top right. That color is red, the color of perception. Akshobhya, Vajradat Visvari, the consort or the perfect complement, the male-female complements in co-emergent union. That represents space, ether. On the bottom left, Vairakana, Lakana, white in color, represents pure form. Amoghasiddhi, Tarini, on the bottom right, represents concept. And these all represent wisdoms that in fact evolve us consciously. They're there in this kind of friendly mother-father form at the beginning of the process of death, you might say. Meditators, of course, can get into such a state of lucidity and tranquility that they can actually see these forms and participate with them in various work, tantric work. But for those that have maybe not done practices of meditation and who've sort of remained immersed just in material survival and existence in general, may find they won't see these individuals, regardless of what they look like. These are the Buddhist version, but they could be angels, archangels, balls of light. They could be family, friends, members of groups that one knows. It's something that is dear to one, regardless, after the moment of death, after cessation of bodily functions are gone, no more breath. One experiences definite signs, definite kinds of indications that one has passed beyond physical life. The first being a very heavy sinking feeling, and that would be earth, the element of earth. And that experience is passed beyond, and then one becomes very cold and feeling wet, just cold sweat, heavy cold sweat. From earth one goes into water, and then from water one goes into fire, where one starts burning up, just burning up. And these are the kinds of experiences at the moment of death and following the moment of death that indicate that the body connection, the consciousness connected to a particular body, is being released. After one is through the fire element, one goes into the air element, where one feels like one is just ready to explode, expand into infinite space, and that's what happens when one now expands so much through the air element that one reaches a point of ecstatic equilibrium in the element of space. And at that moment, it is possible, if one is present, to see and to be what is known as the ultimately clear light, the clear light of reality. And this is the truth of what one is. If one calls it the truth of God or the light of God, it doesn't really matter. These teachings are intended to have one arrive, regardless of the languaging, regardless of what manual one has been indoctrinated into during a lifetime. The importance is to realize that one is that light, that one is the clear light, that one is not other than that there is no other. There is nothing but that. There's no self, there's no nothing that one can cling to. There's no outside God. It is just this and nothing else. It's called the void in this teaching, or the emptiness, shunyata. It doesn't really matter what it's called. The recognition is the important thing. The realization, the perfect realization that this is in fact one's true nature. This is always what I am. This is always what I am. That's what's really of significance, if you wish. There is no significance here either, by the way. But in that sense, the realization that this is clear light, and it's always been clear light, is the realization of full awakening. And if one can be there and be fully awake to it, that's basically the realization of one's journey as a being. However, should the attachments and the conditioning of life, wherever one has been, start to draw one, if one's habits and tendencies start to pull on one from this moment of this perfect center of the void presence, should one become distracted, let's say, or one becomes frightened and disoriented and blacks out, then one will have to go through this stage of apparent conditions. It's kind of like a bouncing up and down, like a sine wave, in a way, over what is known as, there is no time here, but it's just the bouncing up and down through the components of consciousness and through the various attractions and repulsions of one's programming. And the point is that at a certain point, at whatever level, one ends up in another birth, whether it's in a higher realm or in a lower realm, depends on what one does. But at this moment, at the moment of death, and right after one is experiencing the lucid clarity of clear light, absolute reality. If it's all right for the being to stay there, if one doesn't get into fear, if one doesn't get into anger, if one doesn't get into exhaustion and blackout, if one can just be what one truly is, there is no need to go into any world, into anything. Just to be nothing, just as it is, just this is the end. That's it. Then one can choose, if one wishes, to go into a world, but without the attachment and hooks that come with compulsive, unconscious birth. If one chooses to, one can remain outside the realm of existence and be a spiritual guide that hooks into those that have incarnated. Or if one wishes, one can go into the realms of existence, wherever they may be, and take on the role of a teacher or a liberator or whatever. But in the clear light, there is no compulsion to do or be anything. Nothing is enough, and nothing is enough. It's totally okay just to be nothing. However, if one's hankerings and attachments have drawn one down, then one will start to spiral downward into whatever level one is habitually birthing at. And so when that happens, one will encounter, first of all, a stage in the transit process, in the bardos, as they're called in Tibet, the meeting of the friendly types of guides. Now, these are the forms of consciousness, the skandhas, the components that we talked about, the yellow, the blue, the white, the red, the green, and the rainbow. All of those are going to appear to one as whatever form one has trained for or not trained for. Like I said, it could be Buddha forms, it could be angelic forms, it could be balls of light, it could be just friendly individuals one has known in one's earthly experience or human experience, whatever. Padmasambhava, the origin of jewels, equanimity. This is the component of feeling. But let's start with how it really unravels. We start with, you might say, we start at clear light. And if one can't, one isn't okay to be in clear light, if one isn't okay to be clear light, then one goes to the first stage of the, you might say, descending process. And this one would be Akshobhya, the blue of space. The blue of space represents just this perfect mirror of open mind, open wisdom. Nothing is in that mirror. Nothing is in that consciousness. It represents, like I said, the blue of space, and what it represents in terms of a cleansing radiation, because these are brilliant radiations. There's two aspects to this downward journey. One is in the presence of these liberating, awakening radiances, and yet there is also present the tendency or the draw into a particular type of world, a type of rebirth location. Now, what the component of space, Akshobhya, will dissolve this harsh radiation that burns away any attachment to karmic attachments. Now this is the God realm. This is the realm of gods. And this component, the blue component of space, will dissolve all unconscious tendencies that will draw one into any kind of recurring cycle. Now, this can be a god. A god doesn't necessarily last forever. It has a sense of self, and a sense of self will definitely get one into a rebirth, regardless of where one lands. That sense of self, that sense of ego will draw one to that. And so, for the God realm, it is just some kind of unconscious quirk. One can be a god, but can still have a flaw. And those flaws are what draw one into the God realm. It's a beautiful existence, and it's the soft white light of all sorts of pleasantries and you know, beautiful music and beautiful art and dancing. But somewhere along the line, there's still an unconscious jog, a crash, a disruption. And the component of space, blue, erases that, it dissolves that, and allows one to merge once more with the true clear light of one's absolute, ultimateless nature. Then you go down to Vairocana, the form aspect, representing water. This is the pure form. It is the formless form, actually. It is beyond form. It is form without any content, without any direction to it. It is pure in every way. It is infinite. It is called the resplendent one. It represents emptiness in the sense of nothing to it, and yet everything is possible. and it dissolves the dark, smoky, grayish light, if you will. If you can imagine factories and the black smoke of sooty chimneys and industrial mechanization, that kind of sooty smoke, light, you know, a light you can barely see, it's glowing, but it's very dark and gray. It represents the hell realm, the realm of beings who are caught in violence and aggression, and also hatred. Very, very unconscious tendencies that will land one in a cycle of existence that one doesn't want to be in. Even to look at it, even to consider it, isn't worth it. When one is free in this realm, where there's no body, and there's no identity necessarily, it is very easy to be steered. So when one hears the instructions from readers or from lamas, when one is going through this process, past death, between death and birth, it is very easy to be given instructions. And so if one listens attentively, if one doesn't fall asleep, and one allows those harsh cleansing radiations to clean one of any tendencies to be drawn to any particular world form, then it's possible to once again realize the truth of one's resplendent self-effulgence, and therefore, there you are. Then it's possible to be free to do anything one wishes. But the white light dissolves and burns away the hell world realm vibrations. Then, you know, spiraling downward, one gets into the green, the unshakable aspect. I guess, wait a minute. Green would be Amoga Siddhi. It's all accomplishing wisdom. It's a wisdom that has the power to realize all actions. In a sense, it's got almighty power. It's got the power to realize everything in action. It represents the component of concept, of pure concept. Once again, concept without any kind of content to it. It is just the pure thought without anything that can limit it. And what concept, this component of green, radiant, harsh energy dissolves and basically removes from the voyager, the being that is in transit, the bardo traveler, is the tendency to be connected or caught up in jealousy and envy and intrigue, all of the things that are so seemingly prized in human life in a sense, but not extremely, very destructive types of tendencies, and the component of concept, the green harsh radiation, will dissolve that and once again bring one into perfect clarity where one can be free and awake to do whatever one wishes. But spiraling downward, once again, one comes to the red component, Amitabha, also known as infinite light. This is the fire element, and it represents undividable balance, but it also does something. By the way, the green concept of jealousy and envy is the realm of what would be called the jealous gods or the titans. Beings that are very powerful and very, very forceful, and yet off balance because of their competition. Competition is the downfall of this realm, and it's what draws many beings into it. The competitiveness and the enviousness and the intrigue are what gets burned off by the green light, and then the red light of infinite light, undividable balance, the red of perception, pure seeing, will burn off the dull yellow light that is known as the hungry ghost. By the way, the green light burns off the dull, dark yellow, red light of the jealous gods. So there's kind of like a harmonic resonance with the bright lights and the dull lights of this realm. So the green light burns off the dull red light, and then the bright red light burns off the dull yellow light, which is the hungry ghosts. This is the realm of greed and hunger and passion, lust, just clinging to things and never being satisfied, always wanting more and more, and never being satiated, never being satisfied, no matter how much one gets. It's you may know some individuals who hang out there, but it's called the realm of the hungry ghosts, and it's not a good place to hang out. There's nothing there but misery and pain ultimately. And this bright, harsh red light will burn off all those tendencies. Allow this harsh red light to just hit you in the heart, hit me in the heart. Harsh, cleansing radiation, red light, just burn off all my envy, all my greed, all of that, all my desires for objects, my lusting for things, my projection out that I want back, that I desire. I crave my own projections. I want sex, I want more food, I want more money. Burn all that off, harsh red radiation. Loving, compassionate, harsh red radiation. Because all of this is there just to liberate and clear us of any tendencies toward unconscious existence. And then after the red, what is there? The yellow. Padmasambhava, the origin of jewels. Equanimity, love, just perfect balance in terms of feeling, perfect love, equal love toward everything. This feeling and this sensing together create this component of consciousness, this element, if you will, which is the element of earth. And we're going now the opposite direction that we went up after the moment of death. We went through earth and water and, fire, up to air and space, and now we're going the opposite direction as it's descending, down spiraling as it will. And therefore, amidst the friendly guides, we see this coming out again, like the yellow, the pure yellow light, like a million trillion suns just blazing and burning off that human pride and arrogance that we've accumulated, thinking that we are in some way something, that we're really special compared to something else. That arrogance, that pride is burned off completely by this equanimity that shows everything to be equally ultimate, regardless of how small or big. No matter how degenerate or ascended we think something is. This radiation, this harsh, clear radiation, burns away the dull blue light of the human world of pride and arrogance and everything connected to it. And if we still haven't gotten the point, and we still continue to down spiral, we refuse to allow ourselves to be liberated by what is within us. It's our very nature rising up to try and free us from this self-delusion of being something or other. If we still haven't gotten convinced, then all of these brilliant radiations come at us at once in a rainbow of light. All knowledges, all wisdoms blast our stupidity, blast our unconsciousness, blast our brutishness, blast our apathy, and blast our sleep. Dissolve it. Turn it into energy that is conscious, that is used in addressing conscious evolutionary aspects in all universes. So, as one can see, that this rainbow of energy, this rainbow of light is there for one purpose and one purpose alone: to liberate consciousness from the clinging to any of its own projections. And that's all that the worlds are. We have deluded ourselves into believing what is real is unreal and what is unreal is real, because we've forgotten what we truly are, which is this pure, clear light, the clear light of the void. There's nothing, yet everything is within it. To be nothing, truly, means everything here. But on we go. So, this is the friendly guides. And if we're not, if we can't take a hint from friendly guides, if we can't take a hint from the beautiful archangelic entities that come to us at first, in this first stage, then we're going to go into the second stage. And then there's going to be some tough love handed out here. And all of these friendly beings, these friendly angels, these friendly guides suddenly turn really wrathful, or at least, to begin with, perhaps totally implacable and indifferent. And then they get downright wrathful when we don't get the point that all we need to do is allow ourselves to be open to the cleansing radiations that are coming at us, that are being dispensed to us freely and infinitely with utter compassion, utter kindness. And if one can't get it, well, sometimes it's the way of the hard knocks. And so these guys, for example, Yamantaka, the destroyer of death, this is the component of wisdom that is so violent, so all-consumingly terrifying that it consumes itself before it can even originate as an impulse. It basically turns all anger into voidness. is the antidote to raging death. It is the antidote to the battlefield. It is the antidote to self-annihilation, to all annihilation. It is so powerfully transcendent that it consumes the energies of hell and anger and hatred and everything else and violence into the clear light of voidness. And Yamantaka's dancing partner is Mahakala, whom many may know in more friendly form as Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the emanation of enlightened compassion, all compassionate. This is, in fact, a manifestation of compassion. And so these forms and many others will dance with one and try in every way possible. It is one's own conscious energies. It is one's own primordial consciousness rising up in different forms, attempting in every way to awaken one to one's selfless, qualityless, absolutely void nature. Right now, just as is. So, two good buddies, Yamantaka and Mahakala. And finally, it might be that one just is a tough nut. One refuses. One refuses to let go of one's tendencies toward hanging on to things, toward clinging, self-clinging, toward self-hatred. You know, it just doesn't want to, I just don't want to let go. So what happens? Well, at a certain point, hovering near the point where, once again, rebirth is likely, and rebirth in the same old wallow that I just exited from. But before that, I'm going to be confronted, as one is confronted in the Egyptian version, with the Lord of Death. Now, the Lord of Death here isn't quite the pretty boy that Osiris is made out to be. This is Yama, and this is a very wrathful form of truth. This is where one is presented to one's own unconsciousness. And the Lord of Death, as one can see, according to some, I think that's a bull. Some people think it's a pig. But regardless of what that is is one's unconscious tendencies that immediately wish to slam one, wish to rape one back into the same kind of birth that one exited from. These are the tendencies that have not been burned off. This is what all those Buddha forms, all those bright, harsh lights have been trying to burn off. And if one still clings to these things, this is the result of it, that one is immediately implanted back into rebirth by the force of one's unconscious tendencies. And in this particular depiction of conscious art, Yama is dancing on this particular situation. This situation where no matter what consciousness has attempted to help us with, we have refused, and we are being, you might say, fornicated back into our own unconscious birth by our own tendencies. And that's what the buffalo or pig represents. But interestingly enough, here, this being that's there is in fact the Buddha, who has taken on the form of all unconscious existence and is taking the hit for all unconscious rebirths. And so the very ground of rebirth, of unconscious rebirth, of violent rebirth, of unconscious stupidity rebirth, of hunger-induced rebirth, of passion-induced rebirth, of any kind of unconsciousness rebirth, of hellish rebirth, any kind. It seems that in this beautiful artwork, this work of art here, is represented the idea that the compassionate role of the Buddha has taken on the form of all unconscious births onto itself and will, in fact, bring about the liberation and awakening of everyone who has ever taken rebirth, who has ever taken birth, period. It is the ultimate, you might say, sacrifice. This is the sacrifice of the Bodhisattva. This is the sacrifice of the Buddha, if you will, of not taking the final liberation into complete freedom until every being is liberated and free. And of course, then again, regardless of how many beings seem to have been taken into birth and death and how many beings seem to have been liberated, there has not been a single being that has experienced, that has actually ever done this. Because all that exists is the infinitely endless, beginningless void, which is the nature of everything. And there it is. Once again, one comes back to Samantabhadra. One begins and ends, and it has always been in Samantabhadra. Samantabhadra is the primordial, ultimately awakening. It is the being that is always present, the presence that is always here. You might call it the Absolute, you might call it God. It doesn't matter what you call it. Names have no significance. Terms have no significance. One can worship it or not worship it. It doesn't really matter. The truth is, the reality is that it's here now, as is. And so, if one ends up in a rebirth, rest assured, you'll be back to complete the work of complete and total enlightenment. Well, that was refreshing. I hope. So, bouncing from Tibet to Japan now, where Buddhism did, in fact, go, we have that principle in Japan as well, this idea of instantaneous enlightenment. Now, in some of the Buddhist teachings, it can take billions and trillions of lifetimes for a being to realize full awakening and full enlightenment and full realization of one's purpose. And yet, those teachings that we were just discussing, the Vajrayana teachings, are intended for one lifetime to be the end of it all, to be the completion point. This lifetime is the lifetime that everything awakens, and that's the intention. And with the brand of Buddhism that became established in Japan, the Buddhism of Zen, this truly is the place where ordinary things, the reminder that ordinary everyday life is in fact that primordial way of being, that it is always clear light. You are always at the center. You are not at the center, you are everywhere in the enlightened state. Everything is awakening. And so in Zen Buddhism, there are practices that bring the mind to the attention of selfless presence. Selfless presence. This means that not only is the world a Buddha field, everything, one's mind, one's thoughts, one's feelings, everything is that. One's whole existence is that unexcelled, beautiful awakening. It is awakeness itself. And so, as we can see in Japan, a tradition of creating concentrated attention to get the mind undistracted, to see what's really present, and to see who it is that's present in the present. were developed. These teachings were meant to confer instantaneous awakening, instantaneous enlightenment. It wasn't just meant as a temporary thing. It was meant to make everyone realize that every moment, every step we take is guided awakening. And we are the guide of that awakening. And yet there is no anchor point at the center of it. So this beautiful art will show us that where are the footprints? That's the point, is to be here without a self-image. To be fully present without a self-image, without an anchoring point, without a center to that circumference. To be everywhere and nowhere at once. And that can only be done through emptiness, through realizing the utter emptiness of everything, and yet, at the same instant, realizing the fullness as well. The fullness, emptiness of voidness. And so with these vistas of simplicity and yet primordial attention, these exercises are intended to bring one to that waking realization. One doesn't have to be dead. One doesn't have to die in order for this to happen. We don't have to just wake up after the body is gone. The consciousness can be liberated and awakened right now. Right now. Observe. Nothing there. And in everything, in terms of Zen Buddhistic traditions, nature and the natural world are part of this absolute enlightenment. Everything around us, everything within nature is speaking to us of this awakened way of life, awakened way of existence. And so, as we can see, these beautiful lakes and buildings are built according to a harmonious co-creation with nature, to offer everything that we can of our humanity, but to make it harmonious with the rest of what exists already. And this is very subtle and very profound. It is an incredibly important teaching for all of us now. All the indigenous cultures of the different continents state this real sacred connection to the earth and to nature. And in Japan also this comes out. It's the compassionate kindness and full attention to everything in nature and life that is necessary in order to realize the perfection of the awakened way of life. And we can see here just the balance in all the building structures, and yet the perfect reflection. Now, isn't that a gorgeous, gorgeous image of this is the mind that reflects the truth of reality. It's not creating any ripples. There are no ripples in this pool. It is perfectly still. It represents the Buddha mind. It represents the mind that is open. And all it needs to do is reflect everything as it is. And it is perfect. There is no imperfection that can be seen in this mind. It is the perfect mind. It is perfectly balanced. And therefore the buildings reflect this. So everything in the architecture, everything in the art is reflecting the necessity for this kind of perfection and balance. And that's what's being shown here. At least one of the things. And so we see two different forms of the same type of balance. On the right we have this incredibly beautiful statue of Kannon or Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. And on the left, a temple structure, but notice that they rise in the same levels. Look at the base. Look at the base of the building. Look at the level of the lotus upon which the Bodhisattva sits. And then the different levels up to the waist, up to the heart, up to the head, to the top of the head, and then finally free. This is the different hierarchical representations of enlightened journeys, if you will. But all of those, in fact, represent a unified journey into absolute awakening and transcendence. And so Kannon represents the all-accomplishing, the all-giving nature of one's own consciousness as it dispenses the perfect way for every being to realize their own perfect realization of reality. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. A building and a sculpture, but they're the same. The essence is identical. And then, of course, we come to the Senju Sengendo, the incredible hall of 1,000 Buddhas. Actually, this is Kannon again as the Bodhisattva of compassion, but it also represents all the Buddhas of all the different universes coming together in one situation, dispensing compassionately, kindly, and perfectly awake the antidotes or the, you might say, the elixir and the ambrosia and the nectar that will awaken every being. And so once again, we have the same subject over and over again, but in different ways. And so this powerful and repetitive kind of form comes to us in individually sculpted works that are masterpieces. Each one of these is a masterpiece of carving and gold gilding. And it's incredible that any human being could accomplish this, and yet they are human beings just like each of us is. We all have this potential. We have to realize the great artistry that is capable of being expressed through whatever life we take, whether it is high and exalted or maybe inconspicuous. Yet, that equanimity, remember we were talking about, that equanimity love is present in everything, whether it's small or large, and it's to be present fully in whatever we are that is of the most significance, if you will. That's the thing. None of us is the same, but all of us are unique. And unique and yet perfect in that uniqueness. And this is one of those wonderful Kannon carvings. This is actually, I think, the central one. And here is an example of two of these individually created sculptures made by some of the greatest artists that have ever lived. And these are from Japan. These great, wonderful, conscious artists created these works. And they have their own way of expressing that inconceivable enlightenment. And so from Japan, we went to Bagan in what is now Myanmar, formerly Burma. And this is one of the most holy cities on the planet, Bagan. At one time, apparently, there were over 1,000 temples here dedicated to this, once again, this conscious evolutionary process and the awakening, the liberation and awakening of all beings everywhere. And so efforts have been made and continue to be made. And all we have to do now is to awaken to this and know that the world as we know it is filled with reminders and activating, you might say, resonators to this purpose, for this purpose. Bagan, one of the most incredible places on the planet. And also, we have to understand too that this location was where the Buddha passed away. This is where Buddha Sakyamuni, the historical Buddha, ended up leaving his body behind. And so they say he realized parinirvana here in Burma, or in Myanmar as it's called now. And so much has been dedicated to this one individual. And you know what? It wasn't even based on the fact that there were any sculptures of any kind or anything like that, because the Buddha never really wanted representations of him as a person. What he wanted everyone to remember is that all compounds decompose, that every otherness, every duality will decompose and therefore lead back into a rebirth kind of situation. And the point was to live within oneself without duality, without separation, and especially without fear. And without that, love and compassion and joy are the natural state of any being at that point. And so, in Myanmar is where the Buddha took his final parinirvana, so they say. Although, according to the Buddha, there is no coming or going at any time. In fact, there is no time. So, that was kind of a little revisitation of what we did previously. And now we're going to go, computer chips. No. This is an aerial view, actually a satellite view, of one of the most wonderful, consciously created architectural places on the planet, Angkor Wat, this particular view. And it's a huge complex, a huge temple complex, which was both Hindu and Buddhist. Angkor Wat is more Hindu, but the Hinduism and the Buddhism were very, very friendly toward one another, and they were very happily side by side with one another. So this is the work of what is known as the Khmer culture of what was Cambodia. I think it's called Kampuchea, but I'm not sure. They change names quite a lot nowadays. But so this is a satellite view, and it kind of looks like a computer chip, and that's exactly what it reminds one of, that these are in fact energy conduits. That these, once we see these from above, we begin to understand that there is a symmetry and an architecture as in channeling energies. And so these architectural works are intended to channel awakening force, awakening energy. And so nothing more blatantly clear than that. And the overview, the ground plan, as you can see from above, is just like a mandala. It's a rectangular mandala, but it's got the four directions again. You know, all the different forms that we saw in the Tibetan are in this as well. It is a tradition that tells us about components, components that create an apparent whole. But if you remove the components, the whole is still going to be present. And here it is, the wonderful towers of Angkor Wat, and the terraced towering here is unique, but it's also reminiscent of the Indian style very much, because all of these traditions in the Eastern Asian realms, or the lands that were east of India, a lot of them took the architecture and the religion from missionaries who had traveled east from India to spread the teachings and to spread the building techniques. But once again, you can see just in the beginning here, you can still see that the post and lintel kind of architecture is very prevalent still. So it's not very wide open, as in some other types of architecture, but it is monumental. And it represents, once again, the idea of a mountain, of an ascension into higher realms, and they are stacked one on top of another, and therefore dependent on one another. The reflecting pool at Angkor Wat. And it is surrounded by this moat, or a lake actually, man-made lake, that is used for irrigating all the fields around there as well. And the reflecting pools as well are significant in terms of the iconography, that it represents the mind. The water, the pool represents the calmed mind. And also a place for creation to grow in as well. And one of the most interesting things about anything man-made is that it is, in fact, implanted in nature. And when human beings stop, you might say, cutting back nature, nature returns. And it makes what is human part of nature once again. And that's one of the most significant aspects of seeing ruins like this, is that regardless of how human beings will huff and puff about how unique we are in the world and the universe, the fact is that we are integrally always a part of nature. Although we probably have misbehaved quite a bit in terms of local nature. Now this is once again the Hindu version of the religious art and iconography. I believe this is related to Shiva, although it's hard to tell. It sort of looks both Buddhist and Hindu in its religious iconography. But apparently Angkor Wat is mostly Hindu in its religious perspective. Here we have an apsara. Now, if we look at this, we can see, first of all, not only the beauty, but the presence in this wonderful sculpting. Now, if you see a work of wonderful sculpture anywhere, or a work of wonderful art, one will have to obviously look back at the artist too. This is not ordinary art. It's voluptuous. It represents, an apsara, which is sort of like a Devi or a goddess form, a fairy sort of, but not quite in the context of a pixie. This is a very potent goddess form, and fully sexual. The sexual force in these sculptures and these works represents a positive attitude toward sex. It is a very sex-positive culture, and it is not afraid to deal with human sexuality, human sensuality, and put it in the context of the ongoing process of conscious evolution. Our sensuality is part of our conscious evolution. This is the message that comes through here. This apsara is open for sexual work and play, and yet it is of a conscious variety. There is beauty, and yet there is equipoise in her presence. If one just looks carefully, and doesn't just get distracted by the notion that it's all just about sex and lust. It's not. It's about higher sexual work that all of these forms represent. They're talking about a pathway to divinity through sex. And that's one aspect that the female form is used for in this respect. But we have another aspect where she is very religious and pious, where she is in fact reserved. So it's an adoration of the feminine principle in whatever way is most conducive to awakening, which is most conducive to full realization. And so this apsara has got more to do with meditative and devotional practice. Her breasts are covered, her yoni area is covered. So she is concentrating inwardly and using her force for inner contemplation and inner cultivation. And one last beautifully decorated wall. It's a very small piece of wall, and yet one can see the eminent skill of the artists. Brahma riding on the goose. It isn't so much the individual pieces, but the overall impact of the whole. When one sees all this incredible texture, it affects one perceptually. When one knows that that was consciously done, that it wasn't just done blindly, that this was all carved into hard materials, and yet making them look like they're fluid and alive and just moving with the wind. One has to marvel, not just at the artistry and the skill, but at the concentration and the attention of these beings who are working in stone and working on building as a means of spiritual attainment, of spiritual evolution in themselves. And they passed it on to us. Their attention is passed on to us through that kind of work. Now these are a row of, I don't know, soldiers or possibly guys with shovels, I'm not sure which. But the one thing I notice about the Khmer work, is that these people smiled. There are smiles on their faces. They were happy people. And happy people usually reflects a state of well-being, both internally and externally. Now these are a little bit more, you might say, impartial. And so we're moving away from Angkor Wat, the great Hindu temple complex, to Angkor Thom, which is the Buddhist complex in that same area. And Angkor Thom is, once again, these are more likely bodhisattvas or Buddha figures on the approach into the precincts of the main temple area. And the temple area, interestingly enough, is dedicated once again to our favorite bodhisattva, our favorite Buddha emanation, Lokeshvara, which is a version of Avalokiteshvara, which is the same as Canon, or Kuan Yin in China. So these bodhisattvas are there, waiting implacably for travelers coming this way to impart to them the sense of equanimity that's required to realize the fullness of compassion and joy. And here is Lokeshvara, carved into the towers on every facing. There is a face of Lokeshvara. In other words, the impression is that this energy of compassion is in every direction possible. It is dispensing the awakening, the limitless energy of awakening and liberation to all beings, no matter where they are. An incredibly profound way of expressing it. So human beings, conscious human beings, have continued to pass on this form of knowledge to us, that no matter where we go, no matter what situation we're in, there is always that force of enlightenment awaiting us to awaken to it. It is benevolent, it is kind, and it is all-caring for every being's well-being. We can see in terms of the ground plans that once again it's on a rectangular cross layout. This is the Fiminiacus, which is a smaller temple complex in this group of buildings. And you can see the multi-tiered levels, and once again the post and lintel architecture. So these places were meant as reliquaries or as places of meditation, but they were very insulated, very insular in their characteristics. These spaces were intended for inner cultivation. They were meant to take one to the highest level from the inside. When one rises to the top, and then one sits in the presence of oneself, in that naked awareness that is all-pervasive, that is immanent in all and everything. This is another ground plan, similar once again with triangles and with crossed squares. And so this represents the four directions, and of course the central part representing the elements, the components of consciousness, and the purifying journey it takes from the world that is created by those components into the realms of pure presence, pure consciousness, and clear light. And this is it in reality. These could very easily represent the meditative Buddhas, the Dhyani Buddhas, that we saw earlier in the Tibetan tradition. So this whole part of the world has this tradition of five-pointedness, the pentatonic kind of scales, and a sixth component that converges all of those. And the Khmer sculpture above, I guess, in this as a very distinct form of work, and a very distinct form of art that has transmissive presence, I think is unique. Look at the beautiful sense of peace and the sense of power in these works. And there are so many of them like this. At the larger head there is obviously so focused and so concentrated and so accurately portrayed that it could come to life. This individual could come to life as a truly realized Buddha or Bodhisattva. And the same with this goddess form, who is also a form of enlightenment. They are equally stunning in their perfect execution, the softness, the voluptuousness of everything, and yet the balance and the power. The power of the presence is so obvious in these. And so to have that kind of presence, and to be in the presence of a being like this, is the real purpose of art. Art is intended to take us there. This was created well over 1,000 years ago, and yet that being, that presence right now, when you're looking at it right now. That being is right there for you, and you can be that. That being is a conveyor into those states of consciousness, into that way of being conscious. Yeah. What a gift. So, from Indonesia we go, I guess, not Indonesia, that was more Cambodia, that was on the mainland, but now we're going to the islands of Indonesia, what is called in Indonesia, and specifically to the island of Java. This is Kandishiwu, and this is the ground plan of the great Hindu temple there. And the forms and the style is very much reminiscent of some Indian, but a much more vertical element to it. Incredible texture and intricate detail in terms of the levels. That we saw this in Indian art as well, but that was much more rounded. This is a much more pointed form, rising up much more steeply in a pyramid, and yet there is such elegance in the overall construction of it. So this temple is dedicated to Shiva, and right side by side with Hinduism was Buddhism, and they were at peace. I guess one took over from the other. I think originally it was Buddhist and then became a Hindu, and now of course it's all Muslim. But the great work of architecture on the island of Java in Indonesia, and the greatest work of Buddhist architecture on the planet is Borobudur. Borobudur is the center of the Buddhist universe as far as art and architecture goes. It was created in the 800s during the European Dark Ages, but this is basically the center of Vajrayana Buddhism, and it is thought now that it was originally dedicated to Samantabhadra, the primordial Buddha. And the name itself is a modern derivative, and no one really knows what it was called originally, but this is the top view of it. This is Borobudur from above, and it is a perfect mandala. There is your squares and then the central. Interestingly enough, only the inner central part is circular. It's kind of a square circle in the center, and then finally it achieves the perfect circle at the top. And it is in fact a map of existence, a map of the universe in architecture. So this is it in photographic form. Every level has a meaning. Every level has a different teaching to it. And the central part is the realm of the pure Buddhas. And so we can see from above, and the side view, the vertical section of it, there are seemingly 10 or 11 parts to it, with the central stupa being at the very top of this pyramidal mountain, the mountain of all existence, the Mount Meru of existence in Buddhist terminology. And one can see right at the very bottom corner there, that corner there has been filled in. That corner has been filled in with dirt and has actually had carvings on it representing the underworlds, the lower realms of existence, the stuff that some of those harsh radiations were dissolving, like the hell realms and the jealous god realms and those things. Those levels actually have been created in the architecture, and then they were intentionally covered up to show that they were below the level of human existence. And then human existence is the first level, and this is where all the different activities of humanity, mundane interactions and all the different intrigues and things that happen in human life occur, and those were carved on the very first levels of Borobudur. And as you go up the levels, as you go up these levels, there are carvings depicting different types of teachings. Initially, the different, as you can see here, the dark red, and then the brighter red, and then the orange levels. The dark red basically represents mundane life. The bright red starts one's journey into the teachings that will liberate one from the births, the lower births in these realms. And then the orange realm, those levels that are going around and around and around, are teaching stories of various well-known figures in Buddhist mythology or well, I don't know if it's iconography, but in the teaching stories of Buddhism, there are various figures carved on these galleries as one ascends the levels. And so one starts off with the stories of the life of the Buddha, and once again we're down at the lower level. And the lowest levels are, in fact, like I said, covered up, but they are carved with scenes from the different hells and ghost worlds and so forth. And then once we get to the first levels, those are regular human existence, and then up we go. Succeedingly, higher and higher teachings are presented as we go. We can see also that this architecture carries on with the same post and lintel, and we have corbelled arches, kind of a zigzag version of them, but once again it's all based on gravity. Gravity is holding everything in place, and the materials will only go so high before they fall down because of gravity. There isn't much dynamic tension used in these buildings. However, that has also kept them stable, especially in an area where there are volcanic eruptions and earthquakes regularly. So this is pretty amazing that it's stayed intact, although it's been rebuilt in the last 30 years by UNESCO. It's a World Heritage Site, one of the great archaeological sites in the world, and one of the great teaching sites as well. It's not just archaeology. This place has real force and real power. If there's an opportunity to go, this is one of the places one should go in one's lifetime, because it has real force to it. This is a corbelled arch, as can be seen. But what's interesting about the architecture and art of this culture is that they took these blocks and they carved these incredibly elaborate motifs on them all over. So they carved the sections as if they were one fluid piece. Wonderfully, wonderfully done, wonderfully created. Here is a naturalistic looking boat. I mean, that looks real. There's sailors on the front manning the sails, and somebody up in the poop there grabbing some rope. It looks like a storm-tossed ship journey. So that's in the lower levels. And then in the succeedingly rising levels, you have human beings and various kinds of beings going about their everyday lives, rather scrunched up, rather limited in the vignettes that are given to them. So it represents the limitation of human life at that level. Then when we go on, it gets a little bit more expansive. Now these are stories of the birth of the Buddha. This is Queen Maya being taken in her carriage before giving birth to the Buddha, and one can see that it's a more expanded, more joyful looking crew here, a more joyful looking company of beings on the way to bringing about the birth of the Savior, of the Buddha. And then this goes further with various encounters with the different lives of the Buddha, the different goddesses and gods, angels above. Obviously, this is a story about the Buddha's life. And as we rise up those levels, we get more into the details of one individual. It's Samantabhadra. Samantabhadra is supposedly the last bodhisattva who will become a Buddha in this cycle of 1,000 Buddhas for this age of all beings in the universe. The one who will basically bring to an end all unconsciousness and therefore fulfill the awakening moment of the entire universe, Samantabhadra. And then that level of carvings and engravings suddenly ceases. One has been going through these square, very narrow galleries, looking at these different teaching stories about enlightenment, about paths to enlightenment, and suddenly one steps onto the top level and one is confronted by the open air and the expansive infinite sky and all these bell-shaped stupas in which sit the primordial Buddhas in meditative postures. 6 of them, 6 mudras are used, which we'll see later. And each of these represents once again the liberative force of consciousness in its elements, in its components that are here, right now, to awaken all beings, to relieve the suffering of all beings, and to allow everyone to transcend everything that holds them back. In other words, this could be a really fun place to be once we're awake and truly happy. And this is what this is intended for. It is to bring everything into its ultimate state of happiness, joy, and freedom. So these are in the shape of bells, and the bell, of course, is that which is the call to perfection, the call to absolute transcendence of any limitation whatsoever. So, this is the lowest level in the upper galleries, in the upper open part. And here is one of the primordial Buddhas of the 4 directions, one of the 4 great archangels of reality that make up reality. I mean, you can call them archangels, or you can call them seraphim, you can call them Buddhas. It doesn't really matter what you call them. It's the principle that is, in fact, at the essential core of these that's important. And this is from the rear, looking out over the beautiful, lush jungles of Java, the forests and jungles of Java. Wonderful, wonderful view. And yet, one can see that this realm has gone beyond the squareness, the limitedness of that square. It has gone into the infinite circularity of freedom and ascension. You see, it's not just a looping circle, it's an ascending circle. It's ascending infinitely. So there's not just horizontal movement, it's also vertical movement at the same time, perfectly balanced. The circle represents perfect balance and perfect ascension. The light of awakening, the light of truth in everything. And at the center, of course, the center has been speculated about, but if one were to read the esoteric Buddhist formulation, the central stupa would represent Samantabhadra, the primordial Buddha, the primordial force of everything realizing its most ultimate reality, you might say. It's hard to use words. It's hard to use words for that which is wordless. But there it is in stone and architecture trying to transmit something that is beyond words, beyond any form, beyond any material. And yet there it is. An eloquent statement in how conscious efforts can create lasting benefit for all beings. We are the inheritors of this kind of effort and work. This is the kind of true creativity that we can all address ourselves to, whether big or small. This was obviously a massive work project on a scale with the pyramids. They didn't carve the pyramids like this. There are like many thousands of beautifully carved panels in this alone. This place alone. But at the same time, I mean, we can work in small and big ways, but the point is to express this conscious creativity, no matter in what we do and what we apply ourselves to. And this is what humans are capable of. We are so gifted when we wish to be, when we have the force in balance, when we have the conscience to direct our activities, we can create works of incredible beauty and sublimity. This is what we're capable of. Yeah, this is what we're really capable of. And this is what it's reminding us of. And inside those stupas, inside those bell-shaped stupas, this is Akshobhya. In the mudra, in the meditative mudra, that hand posture, ground or the earth is witness. This is the preliminary point at which the historical Buddha supposedly realized enlightenment, and the only thing that was able to be transmitted after the Buddha was able to go beyond any kind of hooks that would recycle him into rebirth, was just to point down with his hand. It's called the earth is witness, but not necessarily the physical earth, but the ground, the ground of truth, the ground of true existence, the ground of reality, is what the Buddha was really pointing at. That it is the ground that allows us to be truly enlightened, and we are that ground. We are that ground. Every one of us. Here's Padmasambhava in the mudra of benevolence, equanimity. Yep. Beautiful feeling. Real love. Yeah, equanimity, love. Yeah. Impartial equanimity, love. These are the forces, these are the energies that are present. These are the energies that are being released, given to us. These are our own. These are not someone else's. These aren't just statues. These are of ourselves as human beings and as beings. Regardless of whether we're human or not, beings all have this possibility. Amitabha. This is meditative concentration. Pure focus. Amoga Siddhi. Fearless courage. Yeah. That's us. This is what we really are. Pure reason. Pure reason, Vairocana. And supposedly Vairocana again in the Dharma Chakra Mudra. And the Dharma Chakra means turning the wheel of the teaching, turning the wheel of conscious evolution. So these are the Buddha forms that are surrounding, 72 of them I believe, surrounding this central primordial Buddha form. And you remember that beautiful mandala of Samantabhadra? Well, this is just another version of it. The primordial existence. And whence these all come from, whence all of these come from, is this sublime work of sculptural art that I think is unique to Java and probably unique in terms of Buddhistic art. This is Prajnaparamita. Prajnaparamita is what would be called the transcendent wisdom, the unexcelled liberative technique. It is the mother of all Buddhas. It is the mother of all saviors. This is from whence all impulses of transformation arise and return to. Prajnaparamita. She is sublime and potent and powerful. And she is basically the benevolent mother and father of all of us. She, capital S, capital H-E, is every one of us. Prajnaparamita is the transcendent wisdom. This is what's calling us. This is what's calling all of us. This is what all art and architecture are about. Regardless of whether it's Christian or Buddhist or Hindu or Muslim, it's always calling us to the same thing. The realization of our perfection, the realization of our ultimately true nature. And it, in fact, when we get to the source of it, it is pure selflessness. It is egoless. It is without any, it doesn't need a reason to exist. It doesn't need a reason to do anything or be anything. To be nothing is good. It's great. It's enough, more than enough. And this is, Prajnaparamita is that which gives infinitely and asks nothing in return. And this is the true nature of all of us. It is the nature of, it is the basis and nature of conscience. It is the nature and basis of love. It is the nature and basis of joy. It is the nature and basis of compassion. It is the nature and basis of true balance. And it is the nature and basis of everything. So, with that, I'd like to invite Deborah Judith now to play an invocational piece. Fullness, emptiness of the void.